Sorry. But we can take it easy for just a few minutes while I get settled. And remember to turn the, oh, come on, stop. Oops. And remember to turn the microphone on so it actually records. Good idea. So how is everybody today? Looking forward. Who's going to ACL this weekend? No? You don't want to stand out there and get sunstroke and... Okay. My daughter's going next weekend. But when my kids were in high school, they used to just declare the Friday before ACL as a vacation day because nobody would show up. And my son came home one time going, "Mom, Dad, now I know what marijuana smells like." We were like, okay, your education is complete. All right, let me see here. Okay, gotta take this off. So dealing with my husband has ordered me a new mouse, so hopefully, come on. Topic 2. So hopefully I'll be back with a working mouse and won't be so I'll have to poke things. Come on. Okay. Sorry, folks. Little technical difficulties here. Come on. Oh. All right. Let me see here. The arrow works. The clicker doesn't. Come on. Oh. What? Come on. Sorry. I know nobody except me ever has computer problems, right? Okay, here we go. Thank you. Me. Okay, lecture capture is recording, so yay. All right, so don't forget quiz today. I think it just opened, and so I'm assuming those folks that are not in class today are either getting in line for ACL, driving to Dallas, quite possibly, I see some nods there, or, I don't know, maybe taking the quiz. Third excuse, okay. So last time, as it turns out, I spent the whole class time on thalidomide, but I think that the lessons of thalidomide, not just as a teratogen, but also the social aspects of thalidomide are really, it's really impossible to overstate how important the lessons of thalidomide are for us, both as healthcare professionals, as students of human biology. So, you know, what was this substance that had such devastating effects on prenatal development? But also it gives us some idea of how pharmaceutical companies work. Pharmaceutical companies are extremely influential when it comes to the adoption of drugs by the general public. It shows us that just because something does not kill rats, regardless of how much you give them, does not mean, that does not necessarily or even should translate into something that is completely safe for human beings. I don't know, and this would be something maybe to check out at some time, whether the ingestion of thalidomide caused the rat pups to have developmental problems, like occurs in humans. But the type of experimentation on rats can only take you so far as determining the safety of a drug. It also shows us that the lessons here also are of a more social and political nature, that the Food and Drug Administration has been operating for many decades, and in some cases has actually prevented the widespread use of drugs in the United States. Now, there are some instances in which drugs have been developed. They've been proven to be absolutely safe. They are available in Europe and other places like that. And the FDA has prevented them or delayed their introduction into the United States. So it goes both ways. You can delay the introduction of a drug, and that's a good thing, or you can delay the introduction of a drug, and it could potentially be a bad thing. So it's up to us, and in particular, it's up to y'all, who are by and large going to be going into the health professions to be aware of the issues that surround the adoption of drugs in the United States. And this continues to be an issue because, as you saw in the video, there are still plenty of people alive today that still show the effects of the thalidomide, prenatal exposure to thalidomide. Okay, so, all right. So just to remind you that thalidomide was initially on the market for anxiety, for sleeplessness, and so those are both issues that we can trace back to problems or I don't want to say abnormalities, but issues with the brain. And by taking these drugs, and we can include diazepam or Valium in the group of drugs that affect anxiety. These are psychotropic drugs, meaning that they go towards or they affect the brain and the way the brain functions. That we can assume they are also being passed across the placenta. Okay, so the placental barrier. All right, so I just got a chance to briefly mention fetal alcohol syndrome. Fetal alcohol syndrome, you know, and I know that you all already know this, that obstetricians invariably will recommend that pregnant women reduce or even eliminate the ingestion of alcohol during their pregnancy. Occasionally you see somebody come out and say, well, you know, we've decided that you can consume X ounces of alcohol per week if you're pregnant. And just like with the mercury and the mercury that is associated with eating some kinds of fish, it's like, why do it at all? And so that's my personal, I mean, if I were an obstetrician, I'd say, just give it up for 9 months, come on. And of course, that is an overly simplistic way to advise medical advice to anyone. And by the way, just earlier this week, I got a article in my news feed about the Mayan settlements. So up until the introduction of the Europeans, they have been finding, the archaeologists around these Mayan settlements in the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, Honduras, they've been finding large amounts of methyl mercury in the soil surrounding a lot of these Mayan villages and Mayan temples, et cetera. And they think it has to do with, it's a component part of cinnabar, which is a reddish dye or reddish pigment that the Mayans used to paint and to decorate. And so cinnabar is like a reddish. So y'all who've taken genetics, you know, cinnabar, yeah, I see a nod there. Your mind went immediately to Drosophila, right? Because that's a strain of Drosophila that have red eyes, right? Probably not due to methyl mercury, however. So anyway, the clay, the painted red clay pots and things like that you see in museums, et cetera, that are the result of being painted with cinnabar, apparently a component part of making cinnabar pigment is methyl mercury. So that's the latest hypothesis about that. But I think, you know, we need to kind of be aware not just of mercury and bio magnification in ocean ecosystems, but also be aware that we can run into it in terrestrial environments as well. Okay, well, having said that, so 2 of the preventable causes of birth defects. So some things are unpreventable. Walking around on planet Earth, which I talk about a lot, you're exposed to UV radiation. Now, our bodies protect us for the most part against UV, the damaging UV radiation, and which is an ionizing radiation. But that would be kind of unpreventable, right? Just walking around, maybe consuming products, being in touch with literally BPA. And by the way, BPA was an answer to a crossword puzzle clue earlier this week. So kind of ubiquitous in our environment, including crossword puzzles. Exposure to BPA, I mean, it's kind of like everywhere. So some exposure to potential teratogens are kind of inevitable in our society. But what we're talking about here are preventable things, like not consuming alcohol, not smoking. So those are the 2 leading causes of these preventable types of damage that might occur to prenatal development. Alcohol use in pregnancy has significant effects on the fetus and the baby. Alcohol, you know, alcohol is a really tiny molecule, right? And it goes right through the blood-brain barrier, obviously, or it wouldn't have, you know, the desired, and if you're listening to this lecture, I'm using air quotes, the desired effect on your mental state and, you know, behavior. So again, it's clearly obvious that alcohol can go right through the mother's bloodstream, or alcohol can pass from the mother's bloodstream into the fetus. And since alcohol is broken down more slowly in a fetus than it is in an adult, so adults can develop different levels of ability to break down alcohol with chronic use. This is one of the reasons that someone who's not used to drinking or has never had an alcoholic beverage, the first time they have a glass of wine, it's like, whoa, it's in my head. My head is spinning. What day of the week is it? But then with chronic use, the liver steps up and starts producing the alcohol dehydrogenase, which is necessary to break down alcohol. And so it becomes, I don't want to say necessary, but it becomes incumbent if someone wants to have that same psychotropic effect to consume more and more. Okay, these are some of the aspects of addiction, et cetera. So addiction is a physical response to chronic ingestion of things like alcohol, things like cocaine, which is also a rather highly addictive drug. Anyway, so an adult might be a chronic drinker of wine, beer, or hard liquor, and whose body has adjusted to be capable of responding to higher levels of alcohol. Not so the fetus. So the alcohol is going to be retained longer in the fetus, and the birth defects associated with this exposure can occur in the first 3 to 8 weeks of pregnancy. So obstetricians, a reputable obstetrician, if someone comes and says, I'm trying to get pregnant, they will, I hope, recommend immediate cessation of alcoholic beverages. Then this is before a woman even knows for sure that she is pregnant. Fetal alcohol syndrome, this is a group of abnormalities that usually center on the craniofacial development, okay? So there are telltale signs in an infant and as an infant grows up that are characteristic of fetal alcohol syndrome. The most commonly known non-genetic, non-inherited cause of mental retardation or learning disabilities, let's say, in the US. And there, I have a link here if you want to read what the CDC has to say about fetal alcohol syndrome. But these are some of the characteristic craniofacial features. And of course, they can occur in different degrees of severity depending on all the factors that we've talked about, when the fetus is exposed to the alcohol, how much alcohol, et cetera, okay? So low nasal bridge, minor ear abnormalities, indistinct philtrum. So you know that little dip that you have, everybody's, that's called the philtrum, by the way. And so these people don't have that very distinct, there's a myth that, souls are waiting to be entered into baby or fetus bodies, embryos, and this is the angel pushing the soul. For those of you listening, I am touching my philtrum. That sounds kind of dirty, right? I've heard that, that's probably not true, okay? Micrognathia, gnathium is the word for jaws. So underdeveloped jaws, again, part of the craniofacial abnormalities that we see with fetal alcohol. Epicanthic folds or epicanthal folds, these are the folds that occur on the eyelid. Short fissures under the eye, and a flat midface and short nose. So, like I said, the severity of these craniofacial disorders, and this gives you a little bit more information about what can what these abnormalities might look like. It gives you a little more detail. But like I said, the amount of exposure, when the infant is exposure, how much the infant is exposed, all of these things can play a role in the severity of these craniofacial defects, okay? So, like I said, my advice would be just don't do it. Anytime my kids as toddlers misbehaved, my husband would say, remember that half a glass of champagne you had at your brother's wedding? I'm like, just stop. Just stop. Okay, so everything has gone smoothly, swimmingly with this pregnancy, okay? Remember our mantra, lots of things can happen, but very few do, okay? And so we're about ready for childbirth. Birth is mediated by positive feedback involving a couple of major, actually a few major molecules, and that most of which are considered in the category of hormones, okay? So estrogen, specific type of estrogen. So estrogen or estrogens is it is a general category of molecules, and there are several important molecules that are considered in that category, but they have different features to them, and we'll see a couple here in just a minute. So estrogen is a steroid hormone, right? So it is lipid soluble. It can go directly through the phospholipid bilayer, right? None of these hormones can operate unless there is a receptor site for them. So receptor sites for steroid hormones are found in the cytoplasm and sometimes in the nucleus of a cell, okay? Because they don't need a receptor site, they don't need a channel on the exterior of a cell. They can go right through the phospholipid bilayer, okay? Through that hydrophobic center of the phospholipid bilayer, right? I'm making all kinds of gestures here. Okay. Oxytocin, however, is a peptide hormone. So when I say peptide hormone, what does that mean to you? What are the component parts of a peptide hormone? Amino acids, right. I heard a more or less general response, amino acids. So oxytocin is one of the smaller amino acids, smaller peptide hormones. It consists of only 9 amino acids. So it's relatively small compared to something like insulin, which has a whole lot of amino acids folded up into a protein shape. All right, so the process of childbirth is technically called parturition, and it occurs via positive feedback under hormonal control. So I'm pretty sure, and I hope, that in your intro bio classes, you talked about negative feedback and homeostasis. I see nods, yes, thank you. I feel justified here. And the best example that biologists can present for positive feedback, which is really vanishingly rare in biological systems, is childbirth, mammalian childbirth, because it operates through these positive feedback. And so you remember that positive feedback loops involve a response that reinforces the change. So it amplifies the change. Not so with the negative feedback, right? That keeps any kind of change within certain health limits, like temperature and blood sugar and those kinds of aspects of a human body that can change, but need to remain within healthy limits, okay? In the case of childbirth, so we're switching to the positive feedback. Fetal growth eventually causes stretching of the uterine walls, which is detected by stretch receptors. One of my former TAs, who's now a science teacher at Johnston High School, he and his wife just had a baby about I don't know, 5 months ago, and he posted a before and after picture. So there was a before picture of his daughter's face in utero using ultrasound, and her nose is just squished right up against the wall of the uterus. And so he had an after picture of her being incredibly cute, but this, I don't know if he was alarmed or not seeing this. I'm going to have to ask him. But definitely showing getting big, getting too big for this uterus. I got to go somewhere. And so there are stretch receptors, right, these proprioceptors, and this triggers the release of hormones. Oxytocin. Oxytocin is released. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. We're going to talk about the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, but oxytocin is released from the pituitary, which a lot of you know as the, quote, master gland. Okay, we'll talk about that and maybe dispel the idea that it's really a master gland. And that induces the uterine muscles to contract, further reducing space in the womb. All right? This causes more stretching and hence more contraction until the origin stimulus, which is the fetus itself, is removed. So that is how you stop a positive feedback amplification loop, is that you remove the cause in the first place. So by expelling the fetus, the child, you have stopped this positive feedback. In the case of like a nuclear explosion, you run out of materials, so it stops eventually. But that is another inanimate example of a positive feedback. So here we have, in very general terms, baby pushes against cervix, causing it to stretch, stretching nerve impulses to be sent to the brain, particularly the pituitary gland. Brain stimulates posterior pituitary release oxytocin, smooth muscle lining the uterus to contract. So you got this positive feedback going. All right, let's put in a few more details here because we're, an upper division biology class. So the chemical regulators of this birthing process include oxytocin, estrogen, in particular an estrogen called estriol, progesterone, and prostaglandin. So we haven't talked a lot about progesterone, but progesterone is the hormone, if you recall, that is released primarily from the corpus luteum after an ovum is expelled from the ovary, which supports the implantation of a fertilized ovum, okay? So a zygote. And so progesterone throughout the pregnancy supports the development of and the retention of the fetus or the embryo in the uterus. So you really don't want that persisting during childbirth, right? You've done your job. The baby is ready to be born, so we don't need the progesterone anymore. Progesterone, if someone has experienced multiple miscarriages, especially early in the pregnancy, many obstetricians will actually prescribe progesterone. And because progesterone is also a steroid hormone, you can just wear a patch for it, and it can go transdermally, okay? All right, so after 9 months, the baby is fully grown and stretches the walls of the uterus, placing a strain on both mother and infant. That's probably unnecessary to say. I don't know. I had twins. It was interesting. This stress induces the release of chemicals, okay? So you have stretch receptors, not just in your those of you who have a uterus, not just there, but everybody has them in places like joints to assist in your in balance, right? To keep your body balanced. The stress induces chemical release, trigger a rise in the level of estrogens. Estriol in particular, we're going to see on the next page how closely several different molecules that are all called estrogens how closely molecularly they resemble each other. And estriol just happens to be one of the molecules that is considered a type of estrogen. So estriol prepares the smooth muscle of the uterus for hormonal stimulation by increasing its sensitivity to oxytocin. So one of the first things that happens is the estrogen induces oxytocin receptors on the uterus, okay? Estriol also inhibits progesterone. They're not showing it here, but yeah, that's what happens. So, you know, we don't need you anymore, progesterone. Thanks, great job. We'll take it from here. That's being anthropomorphic to, you know, organs of the body. Okay. Estriol also inhibits progesterone, which was preventing uterine contractions from occurring while the fetus was developing. Now that the uterus is primed for childbirth, the brain triggers the release of oxytocin. Okay, from the posterior pituitary gland, it goes. And remember that hormones can travel throughout the body, but they can only have an effect on cells or tissues that have receptor sites for them. Okay? So oxytocin may be released, it may be going everywhere, but mainly the target cells are in the uterus and the placenta. So oxytocin stimulates the uterine muscles to contract and initiating the birthing process. And it also helps to prevent the continued release of progesterone. The fetus responds to this uterine contraction by releasing prostaglandins. Okay, so the placenta is still attached to the now being born baby, and that is where the prostaglandins come from, so that's another type of molecule. As the uterine contractions trigger the release of chemicals that cause further contractions, that sets up that positive feedback loop, and the contractions stop when labor is complete and the baby is birthed. So there's no more stretching of the uterine walls, which kicked off this positive feedback loop to begin with. Okay, so we've got estrogen coming from the ovaries, we've got oxytocin. These are the two primary hormones associated with childbirth. Obstetricians can induce childbirth, natural childbirth, with a drug that's called Pitocin, which is it's a synthetic oxytocin, okay? So this from the fetus and the mother's posterior pituitary stimulates the uterus, stimulates the placenta. You've got the prostaglandins stimulate more contractions, and notice that this sets a positive feedback loop both back to the placenta for more prostaglandins and also up to the pituitary gland where the oxytocin is coming from. Okay, yeah?
Babies that are born prematurely or people that go into preterm labor, is it like a mishap in this mechanism, like the hormone cycle, or is it a separate, like the placenta detaches from the uterine wall?
That could happen. The question is premature childbirth a result of something happening, something going wrong with this process or something else? And I would say probably both. That certainly a premature spike of estrogen might trigger this kind of response. I am not sure. I know that estrogens are found in some food items like tofu. Women undergoing menopause are, sometimes with holistic type of treatments, advised to consume more tofu, and there are other foods. Conversely, women with estrogen-related breast cancer month, breast cancer awareness month. I'm surprised not too many people know that. They just think I'm weird having pink hair today. That's okay. That's fine. That's actually kind of, beneficial to me. But anyway, are advised not to consume food products. And I repeat, tofu, that's the one I know, has estrogen or estrogen-like plant materials. So plants also produce estrogen-like substances. So, I mean, it may not you know, you go to and you eat a bunch of, you know, you're vegetarian, maybe you eat a bunch of tofu for protein. I'm not sure there is a lot of evidence that that would actually cause a miscarriage or a premature childbirth. I would personally, you know, I'm not a medical doctor, but I would personally, you know, if somebody was talking to me about maybe they have had this problem in the past, I would say, how much tofu are you consuming? Did you talk to someone about getting a progesterone patch? Because that will, you know, in the homeostatic balance that resulted in having a healthy fetus would have probably suppressed the production of estrogen. So, yeah, okay. So I promised you some pictures of estrogen. So I think it's important for us to realize, you know, we talk about estrogen. But what we're really referring to is this class of molecules, of these steroid molecules. And you notice that they have different molecular structures. The functional groups are different. For instance, estriol, compared to estradiol, it's got an additional hydroxyl group here. So you throw a hydroxyl group there. They've got very, very similar signatures as far as the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are concerned. I think it's, I'm not going to expect you to memorize this. I just want to point out a couple of things, that there really is a difference in the functionality or the target cells where these molecules come from when it comes to comparing estriol with this extra hydroxyl group and estradiol. So you hear a lot about estradiol because that is the type of estrogen that is produced in the ovaries and to some extent in the adrenal gland, and it's the one that we associated with the menstrual cycle. Okay, produced in various metabolites. This estradiol is the most potent form of estrogen. So some of them, responding to the same receptor site, some of them will bind more tightly than others. Okay, so estradiol is the one that fluctuates throughout the different phases of the menstrual cycle. So that is the form of estrogen that you hear about and probably are aware of. We're going to very briefly talk about the menstrual cycle in a couple of weeks when we talk about maturation. It exerts the effect of estrogen by binding to estrogen receptors, okay? It can induce the formation of uterine cancer. So there are, and I would add some forms of breast cancer as well to that. Estriol, though, formed as waste during both estrone, which you can see down here, that's got a double bond oxygen, and estradiol metabolism. This is produced in the liver and the placenta. Okay, so you have two different sites of origin for these two different forms of estrogen. All right, measurable during pregnancy as it is produced by the placenta, and it binds to estrogen receptors, which blocks the ability of estradiol to exert an effect. And it actually has an anti-cancer action. I have not seen much in the literature about its cancer fighting or cancer prevention abilities. Okay, so we see a difference in these two extremely similar molecules. There's a difference in where they're produced. There's a difference in the action that they can perform. And I think it's very important for us, just as members of the general public, to understand that some estrogen molecules can have can actually induce cancer or make it worse, and some have an anti-cancer effect. So, like I said, where it's formed, where it's produced, and 88%, just 8% as potent as estradiol. So it may get in there. It's not as doesn't have the same dramatic effect that estradiol does on a female body, but it is extremely important during the process of childbirth, okay? All right, this is just another flow chart. If you didn't like the previous one, we can just narrow this down to only looking at oxytocin, so from the posterior pituitary gland, and you can see the feedback loops working here. The placenta producing progesterone, but it inhibits, okay? So this is showing us not just the positive feedback loop, but some of the negative feedback loops that exist while the baby is still forming in the uterus, okay? And I have, just in case you're interested, I have a picture of oxytocin. As I mentioned before, it's a peptide hormone. It is, contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 amino acids. So it's considered a small peptide, okay? I cannot remember right now how many amino acids are contained in insulin, but it's a much, much larger molecule, okay? All right, so any questions about that I might possibly be able to answer for you regarding any of the topics that we've just covered in topic 2? Okay. You always look puzzled. Too many things. Oh, okay. Sorry, not sorry. Okay. I just want to introduce in the last, 7 minutes or so, 9 minutes, introduce you to our module or our topic 3, which is human development, birth to maturation. Okay, so we've had a successful childbirth, like on the previous page. So what's going on here? So we know that babies don't have the same relative body sizes that we see in adults, okay? And this is the study of allometry, all right? Allometry is the study of the relative sizes or relative physiological issues or responses in animals. I have no doubt our botanist friends also can use allometry, but here is what we see as far as an allometric truism regarding the growth of human beings. So during growth, a person will change shape as well as size. So we know that humans get taller, humans get bigger when it comes to after birth, and for at least 16, 17, 18 years, humans get bigger. But they also change in shape, right? So compared with a reference part, the growing feature may exhibit positive or negative allometry. So what do we mean by that? Allometry is the growth of body parts, because we're just looking at anatomy right now, resulting in a change of body proportions. So let's take this adult, this 25-year-old, almost 26-year-old, and let's put him at a certain height. Well, if we blew up a baby, which sounds terrible, but if we make the baby, we stretch the baby out to be, let's say, 6 feet tall, but keeping the proportions of the baby intact, this is what we would see. The baby would have a huge head, not so big in the trunk, and really tiny little stubby legs. Okay, so everybody gets that, right? We're not, we're just taking what might be a reasonable male human height, and we're just stretching the baby out, but keeping the proportions intact. Okay, and that just looks weird, right? Allometric growth, humans display this. Most of the animals that I know of, certainly mammals show allometric growth, that is different growth rates for different body parts. And it's well described by this equation, y equals b, x to the a power. All right, I'm not going to have you calculate any of this, but Y is one trait, so you can measure something. It's an anatomical trait. In this example, they're saying metabolic rate. Yeah, you could do that too. That's a physiological variable. B is a constant. A is the allometric or scaling coefficient. So that's essentially the slope of a curve, all right? And X is the other trait. So we're always measuring two different things when we do allometric measurements. And you're probably sitting there going, well, who in the world, why would a biologist be concerned about measuring body parts and comparing body parts to each other? And we can learn a lot about the evolution of a species based on the allometry or the differences in the ratios of different body parts as an animal grows up. We can also look at the effects of artificial selection, so human beings making a choice of which animals get to survive and which ones do not. We can see that also reflecting allometric differences. So like I said, I'm not going to have y'all calculate this out. You should know what these variables are in the equation, but this is a pretty simple, I hope you all agree, this is a pretty simple equation. So X and Y are, let's just stick to anatomy. X and Y are two body parts. So we can look at, as a baby grows, we can take continual or regular measurements of the head size versus the trunk size versus the leg size, and we can draw that on a graph, okay? Where if A equals 1, so if this, slope, it's the coefficient of allometry, if that is 1, that means that X and Y are directly proportional to each other. So as X gets bigger, Y gets bigger at the same rate. Okay, I'll leave you with that kind of thought and think about, is there anything that would show a slope of 1? As far as, let's just think about getting bigger, growing up, okay? I will give you a hint right now. The heart in a body grows at the same rate as the body does, okay? Not so the head or the trunk and legs, okay? All right, so we'll pick this up, probably back it up on Monday, and you all have a great weekend. That I am confident that I-35 is a parking lot right now. Probably even worse than usual. And so if you do go to ACL, bring a water bottle, bring a hat, cover up. Don't drink alcohol. That'll just dehydrate you. I'm talking like your moms now, right? Okay, I'm going to turn this off in case I say anything else that might come back to haunt me. All right, so good luck on the quiz today. I'm going to go double check that it actually has gone live. And I will be available for questions over email from 2 to 4, as usual. Okay? I like to think that one of these days I'm going to write the perfect quiz. It hasn't happened yet. Just like the syllabus. Not perfect. All right. Got my burnt orange shirt on here. Oh, did anybody go to that lecture on Wednesday night? No? See Ed Yong? You wanted to. I wanted to, too. And as it turns out, the person that was paying for this whole lecture series had COVID, so he wasn't there. Neither was his wife.
Did you at least get free food at your
We got free
Wednesday?
food. We got free food, wine, and I had wine before I realized there were actual drinks. So then I got a scotch on the rocks. Yeah, on a Wednesday night. Yeeks.
When
What?
we were talking about PKU,
Uh-huh.
I remember you were saying something about how you weren't sure if they still tested
Yeah.
babies for it. So I work, I'm a phlebotomist and I work in
Oh,
a lab
uh-huh.
at St. David's, and every baby that's born, they do
Do the
newborn
PKU.
screening.
I,
So everything comes, I think they screen for plenty of other things.
Oh, yes.
But they still do, and I think it's required by Texas law, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know, because, PKU is actually so rare that it's kind of one of those, do we continue to do this test when, so few people,
Rarely
so
shows.
few, yeah. Or for the sake of, finances or the insurance companies or
Yes.
whatever, do we,
Yeah,
do
that's
we stop?
interesting that you said that, because the way it comes, it's basically an insurance card, so the nurse fills out like the mother's, insurance information, and then it has the blood samples. So
Uh-huh.
I was always confused why insurance, do they have to cover it if it's required
You know,
by law, or how does that
um,
work?
I think they do. I got really irritated